Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum and a very good evening to everyone.
Waalaikumsalam. Good evening, Prof.
How's everyone today? Hope everyone's well. Even though the cases are still going up.
Good, Alhamdulillah.
But I hope everyone in the class at least is doing okay. So let's see, we got 16 online. Let's just give everyone a couple minutes to get online here before we start. Okay, so we are into week 8 of our class. And tonight we will continue with our discussion on data analysis. Tonight we move into the real nitty-gritty of analysis. Last week we talked a lot about reflexivity, which we will touch on just a little bit in the beginning of the class, but then we're going to start moving into the actual practice of data analysis, focusing specifically on coding. And so we have a very important presentation tonight on developing a code book, which is a really important part of the process of data analysis and qualitative research. I'm sure many of you have heard of coding as an important part of the process of analyzing qualitative data. So the article tonight and the discussion is going to focus on a structured way of doing coding by developing this thing called the code book. And so this is also going to be the basis for your assignment 2, which is where you will develop your own code book from 3 transcripts that I've provided in Puja Blast. Okay, so I apologize for the confusion on WhatsApp about the assignment and the transcripts. That was my fault. I wasn't clear about that. So yeah, there are 2 sets of transcripts, although one of them there's an overlap. Michelle is in both sets, but there's a folder. Maybe I'll just show Puja Blast to make it clear. So yes. So in the class handouts folder, course handouts folder, there is, if you go to the bottom, scroll down, okay, you'll see this transcripts for class exercises. So this is where the transcripts are that we're going to use in the class. We probably won't start using them this week, but in the upcoming weeks, inshallah, we'll be using these. Okay, so this is for class only. Okay, but if you go back, to the other folder, assignments folder, if you look at assignment 5, the code book, all right, there's a description of the assignment, the project, and so forth. And there you'll see 3 more transcripts. And again, Michelle is overlapped, but this Michelle transcript is longer than the one for class. The transcripts that we're going to use in class are actually quite short. It's not the full transcript. It's only about 6 pages of each one. These are the full transcripts from the interviews from the project. Okay, so these 3 transcripts you're going to use for your assignment 2. Okay, so just to be clear about that. Okay, and then as we said last week, your assignment 4, the positionality statement, will be due next week. Okay, and assignment 3 has already been submitted. All right, so let's just look at tonight's agenda. So for tonight, again, attendance, please go ahead and sign in tonight, the attendance, before you forget. All right, As I just mentioned, assignment 4 is due next week. That's the positionality statement. I'd like to have, last week we ran out of time. I'd like to have just maybe 2 groups just present a little bit on your discussion last week about the positionality statement that you read in the groups, in the breakout rooms. And basically, what did you find, or what were the core elements that you found in the positionality statements that you, in the statement that was read last week in the groups? So we'll just spend a few minutes on that. And then we'll have our presentation of this article, which again is a very important article. So I really strongly emphasize that you should be reading this article, whether you've read it already for today or not. Definitely, you must read this article, and it touches on a lot of important topics that you will directly use in your assignment and then for your thesis, for your analysis in your thesis. Okay, because your analysis for your thesis work, development of a code book will be very helpful for you to do that for your own thesis work. All right, and then hopefully if we have time, I want to discuss a little bit on assignment 5, just because it's related. If not, we'll talk about it next week, but a little bit. And then I do have a couple of short initial coding practice activities, and we'll just have to see how much time we have tonight, whether we can get to those, but I do have a couple of those. The other thing is I've uploaded this additional really important resource related to coding and analysis. Maybe some of you have heard of this book. It's called The Coding Manual for Qualitative Researchers by Johnny Saldana. This is a very well-known book in the field. And I have the second edition. It's not the latest edition. This is the 2013 edition. But I have the full edition online, e-version, and I've uploaded it here in the class. So you can download that for yourselves. It's in PDF form. All right. Even though it's not the latest edition, I mean, when most of the time when they upgrade to new editions, there's not a whole lot of changes. Most of the content is the same. So this is a really, really good resource for doing data analysis. So I've put that up there for you. So I strongly suggest that you download it for yourselves. Okay. Any questions about the agenda or anything that we've discussed lately, or any issues with assignments or anything?
Yes, Prof. I'm Suraju Muhammad speaking.
Yeah, Suraju.
Yes, I'm confused about the code book. You are talking about assignment 2, and I know assignment 2 was submitted already.
No, assignment 5. The code book is assignment 5.
Okay.
See, it says assignment 5 code book on the screen. I may have misspoken and said assignment 2. I apologize. I meant assignment 5.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, please keep up with PutraBlast. Everything you need to know, all the resources are up on PutraBlast. So you really need to be checking in with PutraBlast regularly. All the stuff is here. All the assignments, all the resources are here. Okay, so if you find any inconsistencies on PutraBlast, please let me know. Like you did today in the WhatsApp group, that was important. Okay, but you know, like in the class, I might misspeak here and there in terms of number of assignments, stuff like that. So if you're just going by what I say in the class, you know, you may get confused. So you need to be using and checking in with PutraBlast. That's why we have this online system. Okay, really important that you're, because I put everything up here. I put there's a lot in this course, in all my courses, but in this course there's a lot of stuff up here. You know, and I keep trying to add resources for the students. Whenever I feel I come across something that I think is useful to you, I don't want to overwhelm you with information, because I know students have some challenges when it comes to reading nowadays, which is unfortunate, but I try not to overwhelm you with information. But when I find something that's really important, I will put it up here. Okay, so you need to keep checking in. All right, and if, like I said, if you find inconsistencies or you find that there's a missing link or something's not there, just let me know. Okay. So even tonight, for the Salam.
Professor, I want to know what will be the procedure of final exam.
I'm sorry, say again. I didn't hear you. Can you speak a bit louder?
Professor, can you clear us about the final exam? Final exam. What is the procedure?
Final exam. It's quite a ways off. We still got plenty of time. It's only week 8. So,
actually, we give final exam in different way in UPM. Just for knowledge, what is the procedure?
the
We can
procedure.
write procedure means I want to say it will be handwriting or another way, just like this. Not
Type. It'll be typed.
will be type, computer type.
Yes, yes.
Okay, understand.
It has to be
Thank
on.
you.
It has to be online. It'll be online. It's actually an essay exam. The format is essay exam. So I'll give you a certain number of. I don't know exactly how many yet. I have to check back, but I'll give you a certain number of essay questions, and you have to choose. Like maybe there's 5. You have to choose 4 or something. Okay, so you'll have some choice in terms of which questions you want to answer, but it's an essay format.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
That's about all I can say right now. It's still quite early to be discussing final exam. Okay.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. That's fine. No problem. Questions are all questions are welcome. Okay. Any other questions? Anything not about assignments? About content of the course? How about like last week's discussion on reflexivity and positionality? So how many of you, if I ask, how many of you have actually done data analysis, qualitative research? How many of you have experience in doing qualitative data analysis? I know, Chayang, you have done, yeah. Anybody else? Any experience doing qualitative data analysis?
Yes, Prof.
Oh, Adnan, you've done, okay.
Yeah. I've just, I did many projects, for qualitative, introduction to qualitative research course, and I did it manually.
Okay.
By
All right.
instance of Word. I tried just to, specify starting from coding to categorizing, then to themes, and like this.
Okay.
But I started with the descriptive one, as we know that we have 3 types of coding according to ADU 2019. He starts with what we call the descriptive one, then the interpretive one, then the presumption one. There are 3 types of coding based on ADU 2019. So it's it's what we call that. It's you get what we call exhausted from doing that manually. But if I did it by using one of the softwares such as, for example, in Vivo or Max QDA or other ones, that will be more, beneficial and will save my time as well.
Yeah, it does make the process somewhat more manageable. It's a more manageable process, I think, with using software. Although there are issues with using software as well. So, there's pros and cons, but I think there's probably the pros outweigh the cons of but it's a very personal kind of choice. So, some people really prefer it, some people really dislike it. So it's a very personal kind of thing to use software to do analysis. But nowadays, I think just with the amount of data that we have, and then they're pretty powerful tools, the online, the software programs, in terms of what you can do, and just being able to manage different types of data all simultaneously, I think is a real advantage. And keeping everything kind of organized, and it helps to keep you kind of sane when you're doing it. Nowadays people just don't rely so much on hard copies, so it's just a much more sort of streamlined process using software. We'll get to the software later in the course, though. So okay, so Adnan, anyone else? So we only have 2 in the whole class that have done data analysis before.
I've done it.
Oh, Augustine, you've
But-
done it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Was it a big project or a small project or what?
Many projects.
Oh, your mini project from introductory class. Okay. All
Yeah.
right. All right. So just getting a sense of what I'm working with here in terms of experience. Okay. So let's just, if we could just sort of briefly maybe have two of our group representatives from last week share what you discussed about the positionality statement from the Hodge thesis that I sent in the small groups. Anybody want to share? We'll just get a couple of discussing it now. A couple of groups. Who'd like to share? Any volunteers? No one wants to volunteer? Now I feel like I'm back in my undergraduate class. Come on, grad students. You're PhD students, not even graduate students. You're PhD students. Anyone? Just your reaction to it? No one wants to share?
Maybe I'll just try.
Yeah, that's what it's all about, just trying. So go ahead.
Okay. After reading the positional statement, I saw his bias. Okay, coming from his position
Uh-huh.
in the research study, his past experiences that he and the participants experienced the same events in life. They are both from war encroached country. They were from Iraq and Lebanon, I guess.
Yeah.
And they were also immigrants in the United States.
Right.
Yes. So
Okay.
so
Yeah.
his pre-assumptions where his biases gave rise to the bias which he may have during the study.
So
Okay.
as a reader of the thesis, did you appreciate him talking and disclosing about his shared history and shared experiences with the research participants? As a reader, how did you appreciate that? I mean, how did you view that?
I viewed it as he disclosed, he really showed the reader that's me that he has knowledge about the field he's trying to explore.
About the
Trying to
experiences that
about the experiences.
Remember,
Participants.
the thesis was phenomenology. So in terms of the phenomenon that he's studying, that's what he was trying to show, is that he had that kind of emic perspective. Remember ethic and emic we talked about earlier in the semester? He had that emic perspective because he shared many of the same experiences as the participants. So from a phenomenological perspective, that's why he linked it very closely to his methodology. He talked a lot about phenomenology. He talked about how those, that understanding of the phenomenon colored the way he approached the study, right? So now that's very important because in his method, bracketing is a very important part of the process because he was using transcendental phenomenology, which is the Husserlian method, which is the type of phenomenology where the researcher is supposed to bracket themselves out from the kind of inquiry. So all those past experiences and all those, very strong, those, a lot of the experiences that he shared with those young people that he was studying, a lot of those are very powerful experiences. You're talking about a growing up in a war-torn country, conflict, trauma, moving to a foreign land. It's very traumatic types of experiences. So it's really, it's really impossible to completely bracket that out of your conscious mind. But he really tries to show that, in fact, you could see he needed to show that he had this kind of common background and how I thought it was very interesting how he really tied that very closely to his methodology. And so as for me as a reader, I felt like I really appreciated that where he was coming from, right? And so that there's also, I'm sure, there were challenges for him in doing that, right? What else? Anyone else have any other reactions?
Assalamualaikum, bro. Can I?
Hello, Wafi. Yeah.
I'm not sure, but when I read the proportionality statement, when the researcher explained his real experience and explaining the related to his respondent in real situation, for me as a reader, I felt very such comfort with that statement.
Okay.
That's my thing.
Yeah.
Because that he declared who is up.
Yeah, it is. It is a declaration. It is very much a declaration, and it's an effort to be transparent as well. Transparent with who you are, where you're coming from. I mean, a lot of times we do studies, even quantitative studies, not even just qualitative studies, but researchers often choose their topics for their studies because these studies are important to them personally, right? So, I mean, by right, you could even make the argument that quantitative researchers in many ways should also be doing positionality statements because many of them also have very strong feelings about the research that they're doing. Now, of course, the methodology is supposed to be one that's considered objective and not subjective and all that. So they don't have the same dangers, I think, maybe explicitly the same dangers of bias influencing their study. However, we know that even in quantitative studies, there is implicit bias as well. So yeah, I understand what you're saying, Wafi. It does give you a sense of confidence, and that's what it's supposed to do. It is supposed to give you, the reader, more confidence in the trustworthiness of the process and the findings, because this person is acknowledging where they're coming from. They're acknowledging those areas of tension, possible tension between their own experiences and the objectivity of the study and the data and so forth. But then I think if we were to then read the rest of the thesis, I think it would be very helpful, to know that where he was coming from. And I'm sure he used a lot of his experiences as important insights that helped him also to understand his participants, to empathize with his participants, and also to understand them from a research perspective. I think it probably deepened his analysis as well. And that actually, the full thesis, I have it on Pucha although I don't know if it got erased from last semester. I'll check back. But if you want to read more of the thesis, I'll upload the full thesis. It's there in the handouts folder, but I don't know because when we each semester, Pucha it erases a lot of the data from the previous semester. So sometimes we have to re-upload some of the files. So I need to check on that. Anyway, so yeah, thanks, Wafi. That's good feedback. Anyone else? Anything they want to share? Well, anyway, I think that one is a very good one. And
a question, Prof?
oh, Shahida, yes, go ahead.
What about, I mean, when I read that article,
Yeah.
he was from the same background as the participants. So he chose to be bracketing all the experiences that he had so that it won't affect the way he interpret the research. But what if he decided not to do that? He approached it using, what was it, another communistic terminology? Is that wrong?
No, it's not wrong at all. In fact, if he were to use like critical theory, for example, there's a lot of studies, especially nowadays. Critical theory is very important, especially in Western contexts, Western countries. They're using a lot of critical theory to study the experiences of different marginalized groups, for example. So, you know, as a group of immigrants from that kind of background, he definitely could have used a more advocative methodology, which would have been something like critical theory, where he's more or less talking about the issues of being, for example, being Arabs, you know, Arab immigrants living in an American sort of context and stuff like that. That was his choice, you know, his choice of theoretical perspective. So he chose phenomenology because he mentioned in there that he really wanted to give voice to their experiences. And that's a really good use and purpose of using phenomenology, because it's very much driven by how the informants express what they're going through, you know, express their experiences. He wasn't really, you could tell he was not that much interested in taking an advocative perspective like you would in critical theory, but he could have. Yeah, he could have. Shahida, definitely he could have, right? And so these are the kind of decisions you have to make when it comes to designing your study, you know, and you choose which particular qualitative approach do I want to use. You know, again, what is the ultimate purpose here of this study? Is it, these are young people that nobody knows about, and no one knows about their experiences. No one hears what they've gone through. No one really has studied it and looked at it critically, you know, and he really wanted to give voice to those experiences. He's also, his background, he's also a high school principal. I found it actually, because I actually wrote him, I emailed him after I came across his study. I thought it was such a good study. I emailed him. And so we emailed back and forth a bit. And he's actually a high school principal in Texas in the United States. And so we emailed a little bit, and yeah, he was telling me a little bit more about his background and study and stuff. So those are design issues. And so, yes, he could have done that, but if he had done that, he would have had to be explicit about it and said, this is the purpose of my study. This is the purpose of using this critical theory approach, et cetera, et cetera. Again, that's another type of reflexivity and of sort of positionality that he would have had to explain. So that's another reason why that positionality statement is so important, is that we get a sense of where the researcher is coming from and what is their personal purpose in undertaking the study, you know, the way they have. Okay, so that's another element to the positionality statement that you need to consider. Okay, so again, qualitative research is usually, it's thought out. It's not just, just code some data, present the themes, it's thought out. Like, again, starting your analysis, it's important to think of the end product. What is it that you want to produce? What is it that you want to share with the world in terms of your findings? Do you want to present a new model, a new theory? Do you want to present an in-depth description of some group, of some cultural element of a group? Do you want to, just let people know what it's like to experience this particular phenomenon, like phenomenology? What is it that you want to end up with? What is the purpose of your study? And what is the outcome going to be? So, so you start with the end in mind and work backwards. And that can really help you to make these sort of design issues. Okay. So that's an excellent question and comment. I'm glad you asked that, Shahida. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
Okay. Any other reactions? Yeah.
Yes, Professor.
Uh-huh.
Now, if we want to write our own positionary statement, how do we write it? Does it mean we have to include our background and our relationship or how we are related to our
Yes. Okay. So you
participant?
can, yeah, I mean,
Sorry.
the Hodge thesis is a good example. I have another example up on the Pucha Blast. I don't know if you've seen it yet. I mentioned it last week. There's another example. I put 2 examples up. So you see here, positionality statement, Hodge thesis. There's another one here, positionality statement number 2. This is another example of a positionality statement. And then there's also some guiding questions that can help you to write your own positionality statement. Okay, so for your assignment and then also for your thesis, please have a look at these. They will help you to do that. Okay. So you need to, I'll let you do that on your own. I'm not going to do it in class, but you can explore these on your own. And then try to draft your own. The other thing is that you can, of course, you can do a search. UPM library, we have access to Proquest digital dissertations, which is a database that we get through our library. And on Proquest digital dissertations, there are literally millions of PhD theses up there. And you can just do a search of, in fact, I would highly recommend you do a search of, you can search your own topic for your studies related to your own topic, qualitative, etc. And you can get lots of examples of theses, all right, of PhD dissertations and theses. And in there, you can go through and you can look at how different researchers write positionality statements. Okay, so I've given you 2 here. You can go online and look for more on your own, all right? So these are just a couple of examples. And then there's some guiding questions that should also help you. Okay, so it's really important that as PhD students, you guys can, you need to learn to be resourceful. Okay, you can't expect your lecturers to, spoon feed you every type of information that you need. You have to go out and find things on your own. That's really an important part of being a PhD student, is to be resourceful. So I give you some examples, to get you started, but then after that, you need to go and really explore on your own. Okay, that's a really important part of the learning process of PhD. Okay, so, but if you have questions, feel free to ask, while you're working on it, no problem. Okay, so if nothing else, we will, I guess, move on. And who are our presenters tonight? I think Augustine, you're presenting, yes?
Yes.
Do you have a partner in crime?
Yes, we are 3.
Oh.
Nazru and Wafi.
Okay.
Nazru and Wafi, yes.
The 3 amigos.
Limited company.
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, so as I mentioned, this is a really important article for both for your assignment as well as for your thesis. Code books, in fact, I didn't learn about code books until about 10 years ago. I went back to the US to do I was a visiting scholar for about 9 months, and I took a course in advanced qualitative data analysis, and the professor I had, she used code. She taught us about code books, and then in the class we had to develop our own code book from a set of about 9 interview transcripts for that course. It was a pretty intensive course, but it really showed me the value of doing code books and how it can really help you to organize your data analysis, because data analysis and qualitative research can be very, there's a lot of words for it. It can be very mystical. It can be very intimidating. It can be very, very confusing. It can be very frustrating at times, because again, it's not this sort of linear process like you undertake in quantitative studies. So, but learning how to do a code book really helped me to understand that you can actually make it a much more structured process. And so it's really important that you learn how to do code books. And I think it'll help you immensely when you go to do your thesis. Okay, so let's try and really pay attention to the presentation. And if you haven't read the article, really, you need to do so. And I know it's hard because a lot of you are early in your thesis work. You're still in semester 1 or 2, and you're just thinking about your proposal yet. You're not even really thinking about data analysis yet. And so that makes it maybe a bit disconnected, but it's important, at least you start now, and then you'll refer back to it when it comes time to at least write about data analysis in your proposals. Okay, so that's the other thing, is that a lot of students nowadays, they don't write very detailed proposals. They're chapter 3 for their PhDs in qualitative research. They just write the generic, I'm going to do coding, categorizing, thematizing. They just write that sort of generic story. And they don't really think much about analysis because they haven't done much background work in understanding what goes into data analysis. Okay, so the earlier we start, the better, because it'll help you to write a better proposal. Awesome. Okay, so can we, I'll hand it over to our presenters.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. I want to share my screen.
Yeah, go ahead. You have permission to share.
Yes. Professor, I'm just trying to search where we are present now. It's share my screen. Can you all see my screen?
Yep.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Please, I would like to ask for your tolerance. I'm a stammerer. I'm a pause on the way, but definitely I will surely finish my presentation. Okay. My name is Augustine Knows. I will be the first presenter for today, week 8, data analysis, developing a codebook. And the topic is from some authors, Decoy Gambi, Marshall, and Macaulay.
Augustine, you may want to use slideshow mode. Do you know how to switch to slideshow mode? Down here at the bottom, to maximize the screen.
I have to look for it.
No, there's an icon right on the bottom next to comments. There's those 4 little icons on the right. It's the one all the way on the right.
Next to the comments.
At the bottom of the screen, it says notes and comments. You see in the orange bar on the bottom towards the right.
Okay.
And then there's 4 icons. The icon all the way on the right is the one that's for slideshow. Or you can go to view and then do it that way at the top. On your toolbar at the top, you go to view.
I'm trying to look for it. View.
Okay, never mind. It's okay. Just proceed. You don't want to waste any more time.
Okay. Can you all see my screen? Can you see my screen, Professor?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay. We are going to talk about coding, and the first slide is about code. It says At the end of the discussion today, we'll be able to know the meaning of code, how to develop a code, and what is a code book, and the process of coding. First, code. A code simply means tags or label that are used to assign units of meanings to the descriptive or inferential information compiled in a qualitative study. And the codes may be in form of phrases, sentences, or paragraphs that are connected to a specific context or setting. In qualitative analysis, developing the code is the initial process a researcher will have to do to help him or her to make meaning of the interview data during the analysis of interview data. And the code can be developed from 3 areas. It can be developed from an existing theory called theory-driven, or it can be developed from raw data, which is called data-driven, or a project research goals or questions. In developing code from a theory, it will involve the coder to revisit the theory many times. Then in developing a code from the raw data will involve the coder to thoroughly examine the data in order to develop the code.
Okay, are you done with that? Can you go back to that slide?
Okay.
Okay, yeah, just to add on some a few things here. So they start off by giving us the definition of a code. So it's important to know what is a code. Okay, so a code is any tag or any label that we give a lot of qualitative authors, they use this word chunk. So any chunk of data, right, that we find is meaningful to the study, we ascribe a tag or a label to it. Okay, so essentially it's like a summary. It's like a way of summarizing a chunk of text in the study. Okay, so and then we give it a label, right? And that's called a code, right? And so like it says there in the slide, it can be in the form of a sentence, a phrase, or even a single word, really, the code. But it's connected to some amount of text in your either interview transcript or your field notes or observation notes, whatever it is, okay? And so that's essentially, it's a unit of meaning, okay? So when we find text, we find data that's meaningful, we identify how much of it is meaningful, how big is the chunk of data, and we assign a code to it, okay? So now it says there, a code can be developed from existing theory, raw data, or a project's research goals or questions. So theory-driven would be a form of what type of coding? If you're developing your codes initially from theory, in this article, they use the term theory-driven. Okay, so this is where I warned you early in the semester about jargon in qualitative research literature. So this is an issue of jargon. So there's another word for theory-driven in the literature. Anybody know what it is? Theory-driven coding is also called what?
Grounded theory.
Grounded theory? Did someone say grounded theory? Did someone say grounded theory just now? No? I thought someone said grounded theory. Anyone know? Theory-driven is also referred to as what?
Theory first.
Okay, no, that's, yeah, I mean, it is theory first, theory-driven, but that's not the term that's often used. It's deductive coding. Deductive coding. Remember that we talked about inductive versus deductive early in the semester? Okay, so any coding that starts with theory is called deductive coding. Okay, in other words, you identify your codes from the literature, and then you look to apply those codes or analyze your data with those codes from theory. Okay, so that's deductive coding. Raw data or data-driven codes is what type of coding?
Inductive.
Inductive coding.
Yes, thank you. Inductive coding. Okay, so a lot of people assume that all qualitative research involves inductive coding, which it does not. Okay, it does not. You can do deductive coding in qualitative research. Okay, that starts from your theoretical framework, for example. In this particular study, the example they give of their project, they actually use both. They use a combination of theory-driven as well as data-driven or inductive codes. Okay, and that's pretty common in a lot of qualitative studies, actually. It's a combination. Okay, and so that it's really important to know that, to realize that you can use pre-existing codes from literature in your qualitative studies. Okay, and that's called deductive or theory-driven coding. And then if you do coding according to your study research questions or research goals, that's called structural coding, where you actually parcel out data according to the different research questions. It's a different way of coding according to the questions. Okay, so it says theory-driven revisiting of theory. Okay, so as you apply those deductive codes to your data, of course, the codes will get revised. So theory is one thing, but data is something else. So there tends to be a process where the codes get revisited in terms of their meaning and their definition, and they're going to talk about that in the study. Okay. Data-driven codes is where you undertake a thorough examination of the raw data and you develop your codes from the data itself. Okay, so there's no pre-existing code. You read the data, and then from the data, you come up with your own codes, or you use words or phrases from the data itself to develop the codes. Okay, so that's the inductive approach, which is more common in qualitative studies. Okay, so this is they're just giving us an introduction to the different types of coding that you can do. Okay, any questions about that? Okay, Augustine.
Okay. Then the next slide talks about codebook. Okay.
Class.
A codebook is a set of codes, definitions, and examples that can be used as a guide in analyzing interview data. And there are certain features or characteristics of a good codebook specification. It should be specific. The codebook should be specific, because the more specific the codebook is, the easier it is for the coder to differentiate between the codes and to determine examples from non-examples of individual codes. Then detailing. A codebook should be well detailed. The more detailed the codebook is, the more consistent it will be when it is being used to code interviews. Then the third one is structure. A codebook should be well structured in the sense that the structuring of the code book should contain certain vital components, 6 vital components. It should have a name or label, brief definition, full definition, inclusion criteria, exclusion criteria, and examples. So when creating a code book, all these necessary features should be included. Coding.
Okay, so you can talk about coding now. Let me just go back to the code book for a second. So the purpose of the article is really to describe how they develop code book, how code book is developed and then verified, or they talk about reliability of the code book. So essentially, what is a code book? Well, it is a list of your codes that you will use in your study. Again, codes may come from literature, from theory, or they may come from the data itself. Okay, but as you go through and conduct this analysis, you're going to develop this code book as you go, and that code book consists of. Here they talk about 6 main components, but for example, the code book assignment that you're going to do for the class, I'm going to ask you to provide 4 components, which is the name of the code, the definition of the code, subcodes, because oftentimes when you're starting out in your analysis, you don't really know necessarily whether something is a code or a subcode. Okay, if it has, for example, if it has more specific codes underneath it or subsumed under it. So you have subcodes and then you have examples from the data. All right, and so I'm going to show you that later in the class. I'll show you the example of the code book and what it looks like. But that is essentially what a code book is. And so as you undergo and undertake your analysis, your code book develops as you go along, okay, through the process of analysis. And so this is where qualitative research becomes, again, somewhat challenging in the sense that you are analyzing as you're collecting your data. In other words, as you're doing your interviews, you're also analyzing your data, and as you're analyzing, you're developing your code book as you go, okay, as you go. So the more codes, the more data you go through, the more your code book is going to develop and evolve, okay? All right, so, okay, so you can go ahead and continue, Augustine,
Okay.
Process of coding.
Okay. Okay, then now we're going to talk about coding. Coding is simply the assigning of codes to a raw data. And there are 2 levels of coding, open coding and Azure coding. In the beginning of the interview data analysis or creation of code, the first coding process will be open coding. The researcher will have to create an open coding. And when the open coding is created, it is necessary to analyze them through the process of Azure code. The open coding will help the researcher will help the researcher to explore more ideas and meaning which are contained in the data. And the second level of coding, which is the Azure coding, will enable the researcher to identify the connection that may exist between the codes which he or she is using. Then we have the benefits of coding. It allows the researcher to engage in data reduction, simplification, data expansion, in the sense that it will help researchers to make new connections between concepts. It also allows the researcher to transform the data. That is converting the data into two meaningful units. So it actually gives room for transformation of data and reconceptualization. Here it involves rethinking the theoretical associations of the data. So I'll go over to the next. This didn't show. Professor?
Yes.
My diagram did not show.
Which diagram is that?
Diagram on how to diagram about
The process of coding in the article.
Yeah. Process of coding, the theory, then coding, and the data.
Okay.
Can I go over to the next slide?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. Oh, wait, Doctor. Professor. Let me try to open it from my desktop.
Okay, you can try. It's okay. I think you can proceed. It's just it's a very simple diagram. I don't think it's that important. Go ahead.
Okay.
This one.
Can you see it now? Yeah, this one.
Yeah.
We start literally show how you can create the code. Actually, the creation of codes or coding process is a circular process. As you can see here from the raw data, theory, research, literature, then you will start developing the codes. After developing the codes, you will begin decoding, which requires assigning the codes to your data. Then the last is the creation of the code book. Okay, as mentioned earlier, codes are created from three major areas, namely theory, data, and research goals. And they have different steps. There are different steps in creating creating a theory-driven code and a data-driven code. In developing a theory-driven code, it involves 3 steps: generating the code, reviewing and revising the code in the context of the data, and determining the reliability of the coders and the code. While in data-driven, it involves 5 steps: revising raw information, identifying the source samples, themes, comparing the themes across the source samples, creating the codes, and determining the reliability of the codes.
Okay, so Augustine, you skipped the part of the article about the study that they are basing the article on, I guess?
Yeah.
You skipped that part, okay. So in this article, they give us an example of how they conducted this process by highlighting an actual project that they did on nurturing on mathematics teachers and how they teach. So in the rest of the article, they apply they show how they apply these techniques to the actual study that they did in the article. Okay, so anyway, So here because in this study that they did, they undertook both. They started with theory-driven coding or deductive coding from their theoretical framework, which they explain in the article. And then after they do the coding, develop the codes based on the theory-driven approach, then they go back and they do the data-driven development of data-driven codes. Okay, so they start with deductive coding, and then once they've sort of, I guess they sort of saturate those theory-driven codes. And in other words, after they've done a certain number of interviews, they find there's no more theory-driven codes. Then they go back and they do the inductive open coding. Okay, the data-driven coding. And what that does is that fills the gaps that were left from the deductive or the theory-driven coding. Okay, so they use both. So they start with theory to code as much as they can according to their theoretical framework, the theory-driven codes, and then they go back and they code inductively from the raw data. Okay, and so they're showing you here the difference in terms of the actual steps undertaken. They're a bit different in terms of the approach. Okay, so in theory-driven coding, first you start by generating the code from the literature. Okay, based on the theoretical framework that you are using. Okay, so from there you develop those codes. And then of course in the article, they talk about the process of doing that and how, because this was a team-based project, there was a lot of deliberation among the team members in the study on the generation of those codes from the theory. Okay, so for your own study, of course, you won't have that luxury of having a team to really work through the generation of those codes, but you don't have to have a team necessarily. You can do it on your own. Okay, so you generate the codes from the theory, all right, and then you go through and you try to analyze the data according to those codes, all right, and what you find is that there is a need to review and revise those codes according to the data, even though theory says one thing, but the data says something else. So you have to sort of find the sort of happy medium, or there's a sort of negotiation process there between the code and the data. Okay, so the theory says this, but the data is saying this. Well, that's where you may need to revise the code, okay, according to what's in the data. Okay, and then of course the issue of reliability. All right, and this has to do with trustworthiness of the analysis. All right, and so they talk about they're going to talk about how they do that. So theory-driven starts with codes. Okay, and then it tries to apply those codes to the actual raw data. Okay, the data-driven approach, the inductive approach. First, we begin by doing open coding. Okay, so we reduce what's called the raw information, the raw data, according to what is relevant to the study. Okay, so for example, in an interview, you may find that not all the data in the interview is relevant to your study. Okay, so you want to first sort of parcel out those parts of the interview that are relevant to the study questions. Okay, and then go through and I don't know why, I don't like the language they use here, identify subsample themes. In other words, you identify sort of broad themes first, and then you compare those with across maybe 2 or 3 interviews or subsamples, and then you create the codes from there. Okay, that's not necessary though. You can start by the very first transcript, the very first interview transcript. You can begin by doing open coding of the raw data. Okay, so here their data-driven approach is a little bit different than we find in a lot of other texts. Okay, but again, in qualitative analysis, there really is no one way of doing it. There are different approaches, but there are general principles that we follow. Okay, so open coding is starting with the data, okay, and developing codes from the data. Okay, essentially. And theory-driven is starting with theory, starting with literature, developing codes first, and then applying those codes to the data. Okay, and so that's essentially the difference. Okay, Augustine, can you continue for the
Yes.
next
This is the last part in my slides, and this shows the way to develop a code book. You have to as you just emphasized, from the theory-driven code, then you will review and revise the codes within the context of the data. Then the last part will be establishing the reliability of the codes. Then also, when it comes to data-driven codes, you have to identify the after
Augustine, we can't hear you.
yes.
No, we couldn't hear you.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Okay. After what? You said after something.
Yeah. After creating the data-driven code, you will identify the subsample themes. Then compare the themes across the subsamples. Then create the codes and establish reliability. So here ends my part. I guess Nazro will continue.
Okay, I'm not sure.
Okay, Professor.
Yeah, Nazrul, which section are you starting with in the article? Because there's a lot of information here that is important that we need to discuss. We can't hear you.
Yes, I can hear you.
Nazrul should be starting from page 144. Okay.
I cannot in.
Okay. Wait. I had to.
You can leave.
I had to end. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, I think there's a question. Oops.
Everyone see my slide?
Yeah. Okay, so sorry, before you start, Nazrul, there's a question from Shahida in the chat box. So Shahida asked, how different or similar is developing a codebook with thematic analysis? Yeah, this is not a different way of analyzing data. This is just a tool for coming up with. It's a tool for developing your theme. So, for example, this is a way of doing thematic analysis, okay, but it's a structured way of doing it, okay, more structured way of doing it, okay. So it's not a different type of analysis. It's just a tool for analysis, okay. So what they're doing essentially is thematic analysis. They're just showing a way of doing it in a more structured approach, okay, using something called the codebook, okay. But it is essentially thematic analysis. Yeah, it's okay.
I can stop now.
Yeah. Have you read the article? Shahida and Maizura, you mentioned that you're confused. Have you read the article? Did you read the article?
The one that you for today presentation, Prof?
Yeah.
Yes, Prof. I've read one time only.
Not this article, but different kind of article, but talking about codebook also.
Okay.
I don't have access to the Putrabra, so I just received it from one of the classmates. So I'm starting to read it now, actually.
Oh, you are a student. Okay. All right.
Yes, I am. I'm just sitting in.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Yeah. Well, after you should go through it. Go through the article. Yeah, of course. This is just the beginning. We've just begun to talk about this topic, so it's of course going to sound confusing to start with. Okay, let's let them finish up their presentation. Mr. Nazrul, can you present your?
Yeah. Assalamualaikum. Good evening. This is Nazrul Islam from Bangladesh. Now I am studying my part. Everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes.
In my part, I am studying now. This presentation presents detailed steps on as follows. How to build a coding guide for data coding, interview, and review the creation of theory. How to
Mr.
develop
Nazrul, you have to share your screen. We can't see the slides. You have to share your screen. We can't see the slides.
you cannot see?
No.
Yes, we cannot see.
Okay.
Go down and click share. Share screen.
So while he's doing that, let me just elaborate a little bit on the previous step. So
Now
remember.
it's okay?
Oh, okay. Never mind. He's ready. No, we still can't see.
No. Go at the bottom of your page, the Zoom meeting page. Then you will see an arrow pointing up. Yes.
Now is okay?
Okay, we can see now. Can you maximize the screen though? It's very small. Make it bigger.
Wait.
Yeah, there you
Now
go.
is okay?
Oh, wow, that's really big. Okay. Ha. Be careful what you wish for. Okay, go ahead.
Just a minute. Okay, Bismillah Rahman Rahim. This presentation presents detailed steps on as follows. Number one, how to build a coding guide for data coding, interview, and review the creation of theory. Number two, how to develop data-driven codes of a research project for professional development. And next, I have gathered knowledge from different sources to attend. Presentation here is given below. Number one, in qualitative analysis, coding is the first step of a A code is a name which identifies a code content in a document. Number two, code books provide description of themes and sub-themes as guide for narrative text coding. Number three, the basic number of the sorting of text data and for the relocation of narrative text areas for deeper method is presented to each theme and sub-theme. Number four, there are three very different coding strategies these include.
Sorry, Mr. Nazrul, can I stop you there?
Yeah, sure.
Are you presenting the article that we're supposed to be reading for this week that I put up on the Pucha Blast? This is not from that article, is it?
Yes, I read that, but in my part, I can see there is a little information. So then I have collected it from different sources.
There's little information? I'm not sure what you mean. What do you mean by that? There's little information. You're supposed to present the information in the article.
Yeah. I have another slide. This is the this slide from.
Okay. All right. Why don't you start with this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
School of learning are present here. Number one, how to develop data-driven codes. How do you train others to code? Number three, I will discuss these topics step by step and try to give a clear concept about reading these questions. Firstly, I would give to review of literature about this topic of to know the basic fact about. Actually, I have collected two literature review from Scopus. First literature review here focus basic information of code book, and second is how to develop a theory for data code. This two literature review actually discussing here. How are theory and data-driven codes developed? This is the two step. There are two steps, and I collected from our class article. Number one, the first step in designing data-driven codes is to decide how raw information, such as categories or subjects, is reduced by smaller units. Number two, then discuss the evolution of the research project theory and talk about how others should be trained to code categories and determine how codes fit into our coding framework, identity, and act on which topic most often arise. How to
Okay,
train others?
wait. Sorry. I'm gonna stop you there. So data-driven coding is the often referred to in the literature as open coding. Okay, so again, once you've incorporated, according to this approach, once you've gone through and done the initial coding of your data, your transcripts with your theory-driven codes, then you'll go back and look for any other related text in the study that's has not been accounted for by your theory-driven codes. Okay, and so this is where people that use a deductive or a theory-driven approach to coding often have some. This is where you need to be open to new things. In other words, even if you're starting with you have a strong theoretical background, maybe you have a strong literature to back you up, and you've developed, pre-existing codes or theory-driven codes, there's always going to be new things coming out of the data, okay? And that's where you employ data-driven or inductive coding, okay? So you go through with your theory-driven codes, but not everything is going to be accounted for by those theory-driven codes, okay, deductive codes. So that's where you have to go back and do the open coding or data-driven coding. And so that's what they did in this study. They started out first by doing theory-driven coding, and then they went back and applied the data-driven coding approach. So now they're talking about the data-driven coding approach and how they did it. Okay, and so going through the data, reading through the data line by line, and beginning that process of open coding, and first deciding on what is worth coding. Okay, so do you code line by line? Do you just code paragraphs? Okay, some researchers will make that decision prior to the analysis process. Others will determine it according to what they call based on the level of meaning. In other words, you just code that which is relevant or meaningful to the research questions of the study. Okay, so you don't necessarily say, oh, I'm just going to code line by line, or I'm going to code by paragraph. It could be a paragraph, it could be a few words, whatever is meaningful to the research questions, you code that amount of text. Okay, and so that's what they did. They code according to what is called the level of meaning. All right. Okay, and then let's see.
How to train others to code? Firstly, it is important to remember that creating a code book is beginning of the coding process. Number two, the code teaching strategies often accompany the code based referring because of teachers to describe their general beliefs regarding how a student learn. They often provided examples of what they did in class. Number three, it should be focused on the use of computer-assisted qualitative data analysis software, Cactus. It should be trained how this software applied. Number four, maintaining a structured process research should check frequently to make sure all procedures are understood. Number five, it should be assured all members that when working as a team to create a useful codebook, because no question is too insignificant to ask. This is my slide, and Wafi will be continued next. Wafi, are you here?
Yes, I'm here.
You can continue
So
next.
can I? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Nazrul and Mr. Augustine. So yes, this is my part. It's about two sectors. First, about reliability and the suggestion. Let me share my screen. Okay. First, the question is how do you establish reliability? There are three major approaches for measuring iterator reliability. So first one, to calculate a basic proportion of agreement, as Miles and Huberman 1994 suggests, calculating reliability as the number of agreement divided by the total number of agreement plus disagreement. The reliability of 90% or better is necessary for maximum consistency of coding. Secondly, to use the person's product moment correlation coefficient by using continuous variables, or Spearman's rank correlation coefficient by using ordinal variables. Person's and Spearman's statistic measure pairwise correlation among raters. The closer the score is to 1, the stronger the correlation. So the third one, to calculating reliability, is to use Cohen's kappa coefficient, Cohen's 9060, or Lear's kappa statistic, Lear's 9071, for use with nominal variables. The goal of Cohen's to be used with 2 raters and Lear's kappa to be used with 3 or more raters is to determine the consistency in ranking item or classifying items into mutually exclusive categories. So both Cohen's and Price kappas are calculated by determining the amount of actual agreement divided by the amount of agreement expected by chance. There are scores between 0 and 1. There are scores less than 1 to represent full agreement, 0.0 until 0.2 slight agreement, 0.41 until 0.6 represent moderate agreement, 0.61 until 0.8 are substantial agreement, and scores of 0.81 until 100 signify almost perfect agreement. So for this study, for this project, the authors, the research team were interested in determining reliability in terms of which codes the RAs use, as well as how the codes were used. The research team realized that each of the major approaches were problematic in a variety of ways. For example, calculating a basic proportion as suggested by Miles and Huberman 1994 does not illustrate how the various codes are being applied. The raters can have little to no agreement on particular items, but still obtain a relatively high correlation.
Okay,
so
sorry. Can I stop you there, Wafi?
Yeah.
Sorry. So for those who may be a bit confused as to what they're talking about, in the article, they talk about how they established reliability with their resulting code. So from their first doing the theory-driven coding, then they went back and included their or finished the coding with the data-driven coding, and they came up with their final sort of list of codes or initial code book. Then they have to determine whether those codes are reliable. And so in the qualitative literature, you'll find a lot of this now using statistical methods to ensure reliability of coding. Okay, and so since they're doing a big team-based project, they need to show that their codes are reliable. They're essentially trustworthy. Okay, and so they're talking about the different statistical methods you can use. So we don't need to go into much depth about that. Wafi just gave the general overview. There are at least 3 or 4 different methods you can use if you choose to use a statistical method, but you don't have to use statistical methods to sort of ensure reliability of coding. Okay, you can use something called peer review. There's other ways. So there's also this process of negotiation, where you call in an outside reviewer to look at your coding, and then there's a process of negotiation where there's discussion back and forth about how it was coded, why it was coded, etc. So that's a qualitative method. You can use qualitative methods to ensure that as well. Okay, but like they said in the article, they wanted to really provide a high level of reliability. It was a big team project, and so they felt they needed to use those statistical methods. All right, so that's essentially what they're talking about here. Okay, so just a couple more minutes, Wafi, and we'll finish up this one. Okay, go ahead.
So given the size of our research team, the number of categories, or probability that we would get a high percentage agreement was very low. Because the research team wanted to focus on both and the quantity of code once and the quality of code how. They extended the Mars and Huberman's approach and create our own process, their process, which focus more on group consensus. This required them to code hard copies and calculate reliability by hand. Okay, so the process is right here. Decided to consider the consistency of labeling tags with each code. And then there is code several pages of an interview at a time, followed by a discussion of when and how specific codes had been applied. And then they determine the codes that were more easily and consistently identifiable. Then hone in on the codes that were being applied less consistently. Then discuss and redefine all other problematic codes. Next, the researcher practice coding using the new definition of the codes until the RAs had 100% agreement. Finally, we engaged in our process, their process of checking reliability at the beginning and at least at one time during the data analysis process to make sure that coding remain consistent. That's the process. So the conclusion is developing a code book is a challenging process, time consuming, took over a semester to accomplish for this study. Then the final code book consists 18 codes, including 10 theory driven and 8 data driven codes. So the summation here, first, creating a code book should be a team effort. Mentioned Mr. Nazgul, the process of creating a code book is very complex and tedious. The point that forming a code book creation team first, then bring divergent viewpoints, varying degrees of familiarity with the actual research. The team leaders make a deliberate effort to create an atmosphere between and among the members that encourage and values critical questioning and constructive criticism. The second suggestion is developing a code book is time intensive and steps are necessary to create a code book and to teach others how to use the code book. In total, they study 60 hours of code book development and training, quietly visiting codes and re-examining data, so become comfortable with uncertainty and with the iterativeness of the process. The actual coding of tags was time intensive. The third suggestion, theory should play a critical role in the creation of code book, meshing all of the theoretical underpinnings of a study with the data. A critical feature of code book creation is team engagement. Theoretical conversation happen to constitute a feature of the larger code book development process. Then prepare for and to resist the discomforts that may emerge in conjunction with theoretical conversation. And it's also about determining how to operationalize theory. The last one, training the RAs. to use the codebook should be a systematic and structured process to be clear to read, simple to follow, and easy to implement. There should be clear steps to have RS first to understand the codes, how to apply them while coding, and how to use qualitative software. I think all done.
Okay, so in terms of the training the RAs part, you can just that's not very important for our purposes. They're talking about how they train their RAs, but those what's important there is the fact that the process of the codebook, it doesn't have to be a team-based process. They say it's best to do it in a team. It is only because a team gives you the option or the opportunity to really discuss the process of coding with others. In other words, as you're coming up with new codes from the data, that ability that opportunity to discuss with other researchers really helps you to flesh out the codes and to make the codes to make sure that the codes are accurate and that they're verifiable. Okay, but you certainly can do a codebook on your own. There's no reason why you cannot. Okay, so don't think that, oh, you can, this is only for big projects or something. No, we can do it, and you're going to do it. You're going to do it for your assignment 5. So after the break, I will elaborate a bit more on this. There were some parts. The presenters did their best. There were some important parts of the article that were missed, and so I want to just go back and talk about them, but not necessarily from the text. I have some other things that I want to show you in relation to the process of developing a codebook. Okay, and then after that, you can, if you haven't done already, I would really suggest going back and reading the article in full. There's some really good examples in the article that the presenters, I don't know why you guys chose not to show. When you present an article, you have to present as best you can, the whole article, including the examples that they give in the article, because the examples they give in the article are very important to understanding the concepts that the article is talking about. Okay, so for example, there's some examples of how they, going from code to definition of the code to example. There's a couple of tables in here that would have really, I think, helped the class to really understand what a codebook looks like. But that was not presented. And then there's some other examples of text from the interviews, for example, that reflect different theoretical codes that were presented in the article that were not presented in the presentation either. So there was some stuff that was missed. So anyway, I'll go back and try to improve on or help us to further our understanding of codebook after the break. Okay, so are there any questions before we break? Let me see here. There's some questions in the chat box. What is the difference between qualitative content analysis and thematic analysis? Okay, we'll deal with that a bit later, Julie. Okay, that's a good question. Shahid asks, is this a misconception from my part? That whatever qualitative data analysis we use, we would end up with a codebook as the output. Now, the codebook is not the output per se. You mean the finding? I mean, it's not presented as a codebook. It is the output to a certain degree, but a codebook really the codebook really takes us through the first. In other words, if you read most literature on data analysis, there's usually, they talk about 2 phases of coding. There's primary coding and then there's secondary coding. So the codebook is really for fleshing out the primary coding, where you have basically your initial codes, if you have subcodes, and then your initial set of categories. Then after you've done that, and then after you've gone through the data and you found that you've reached saturation at that level, in other words, there's no new codes that come from the data, that is where secondary data analysis or secondary coding begins, where you look at larger patterns and connections between categories and stuff like that. So the codebook is really the summary of that first of the 2 phases of coding, okay, that primary coding phase. But it's not necessarily the output of the study. But you'll get your output from the codebook, definitely, but it's not necessarily the output per se. Okay. Yeah, Chayang, I'm looking at your response in the chat box. Yeah, it's not the results yet, but it is where the results come from. Okay. And it does, like I said, it's a sort of it is the culmination of that first level of coding. So yeah, it is a document lists out with the themes, subthemes, categories, the assigned descriptions, and represented quotes for each level. Yeah. Okay, good. So let's continue with the discussion after the break. So we'll come back in about 20 minutes. Okay.
Okay, Prof.
Okay, so Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Let us continue our discussion on coding. So I'm going to first go back to the article. Good job. I just want to highlight a few things that were not discussed in the presentation. So here's an example of, for those of you who have not read this, here's an example of what a code book looks like. Of course, this is not the full code book, this is just part of it. But as you can see here in table 2, they have an example. This is from their data-driven codes. So they have a code book for their theory-driven codes, which is up here. They give an example of it, okay? So essentially what this is these codes here, so this is the name of the code, all right? And this comes from theory. So this is some theoretical concept from the theory that they're using in their study, okay? Conception-based reference, okay? So that's to do with teaching, mathematics teaching, okay? So it's not a theory I'm familiar with, but it is a conceptual, a concept or a term that comes from the theory that they're using as their theoretical framework, okay? And they have the name of the code. Now they also have the definition of the code. Okay, they call it description. It's also referred to as definition. Okay, now why are definitions of codes important? Can anybody tell me? So as you're analyzing your data, let's say you're doing it inductively, like you're doing open coding and you come across text, like this is the text, okay? This is the data from the transcript, okay? And so if you were to code this data, so say you're reading this data and then you want to come up with a code for this data, okay? Let's say you come up with an inductive code for this data. Okay, so let's see what it says here. Because that then allows the children to use all different strategies to apply and figure out an answer. And there's not that one right answer, which I think is important for me to get kids away from. There's more than one way. It's okay, you and I didn't do it the same way. Okay, so maybe we code that as different ways of viewing a problem, okay, or something. Okay, so let's just say, for example, we come up with a code, different ways of defining a problem, or different ways of different strategies for answering questions, or something like that. Okay, so that would be an inductive descriptive code. Okay, what I just did. Now, why would it be a good idea to define that code? Okay, so here they have description, a definition. Why would we have to define the code? Who can tell me? Anyone?
Yes, Prof.
Okay, go ahead.
I think that we have to describe or define the code in order to align the examples or the evidence that we find in the data in accordance with the definition that we have about this code, so that we can capture, the evidences to the definitions from interviewees, for example, what we call that transcript.
Right, okay. So you're saying that it's important for aligning the data with the code?
Yeah, yes. So
yeah,
that we can get some examples and.
Well, yeah, the examples are from the data, the raw data here is the example of the code. Well, it's actually the data that, okay, so you have the code and we have, so if we have, so what a lot of people do, that's good, that's a good answer then. What a lot of people do is they try to take shortcuts in their coding. So what they'll do is, so for example, they will read the text like I just did, and they'll come up with, different strategies for answering or solving problems. And they'll leave it at that. They'll just name the code. They'll put the code right here somewhere in the margin, or they'll list it out somewhere, but they won't actually define the code. So what happens the next time they come across text that sounds like it might be related to that code, it might not be, what do? If they don't have a definition of the code, it makes it a lot harder to subsequently code it again, use that code again, because they're not sure, well, is this really related to that code or not? Is this text really related to that code or not? They're not sure. And so they do a lot of guesswork. And then later what happens is they find out that, well, I'm not really sure what this code means because I've got all this different data that, it seems like it's talking about so many different things. So it gets very confusing. So the definition allows us to get a clear understanding of what the code means, so that when we come across data, another set of data or another chunk of data that we think might be related to that code, we know we have a very clear idea, a much clearer idea whether it's actually, whether that text should actually be coded under that code or not, okay? Because we have a clear definition for it. So it takes a lot of the guesswork out of the process. And that's really important when you do qualitative analysis, okay? That's why these definitions are so important. Now, the definitions are going to change. Well, I'll get into that a little bit later, okay? But I just wanted to emphasize that, okay? That is why in a code book, we have the code, we have the data that, the raw data that represents that code. Okay, but then we also have this really important middle step, which is the definition. And so a lot of people, to take shortcuts and to make the process faster, they don't do these definitions. Even when they develop categories, they don't do definitions. And that's where things get really problematic, because it's really hard to know whether you've actually reached saturation if you don't have definitions for your categories. Okay, and I'll explain that in a little while. Okay, is that clear to everyone, the importance of the importance of definitions for codes? Does that make sense? Is anyone confused? Please tell me.
No, it's clear, Prof.
Okay, yeah. I mean, it's not, of course, we've just begun this discussion, so I don't expect things to be clear yet, but we'll get there, don't worry. All right, yeah. Yeah,
Maizura here, Prof. Prof, so this is basically the coding sheet for one participant, is it?
Well, they don't say, it's just a sample. So they don't say, like this data here, they don't tell us who it's from. This could be data from different participants. We don't really know. They don't say.
Okay.
This is just an example. This is just an example. So, but we'll just hang on. We'll get to. In a little while, I'm gonna show you what a more developed codebook looks like. Okay. All right. So let me stop. I'm gonna stop sharing that. I'm gonna share some other. Now, just for those of you who are not that familiar with coding, because I know you're all at different levels in terms of your background in qualitative research, and a lot of you, even though this is the advanced class, I know many of you are still in your first couple of semesters. So just to show some examples of what coding looks like for those of you who are not familiar with it, and I'm assuming you've seen this from your basic qualitative class, but just to refresh a little bit. So this is an example of a transcript, okay? And in this particular transcript, as you can see, the coding was done on the left margin here, okay? And this is a study about, sorry, I have to move my panel here. So this is a study about the process of reconstructing curriculum in a rural high school setting. And so as you can see from the top, they've coded they put their codes on the left margin here. And then over here, they have something called themes and other ideas. Okay, and you can see this in the margins here, they have all these little comments. Okay, now these are codes And as you can see in this particular example, there's only about 4 codes in the whole page. So the whole page of data, and there's only really 4 codes. Now, this is what I was talking about before about chunks of data. So these researchers have defined the level of meaning to be quite broad. You see how they have these brackets here? So for these researchers, this is the level of meaning. Level of meaning here is almost like a paragraph or half a paragraph. Then it's not really in paragraph form, so it's hard to say. But these are quite broadly coded or analyzed examples, okay? It's much different than another approach I'm going to show you in a second, which is line-by-line coding, okay? And what we see here from the transcript is that the researchers use something here called in vivo coding, okay? Who can tell me what in vivo coding means? Of course, the name I'm sure will sound familiar from the software in vivo, and they named it that on purpose. Okay, what is in vivo coding? Anybody know?
Is it descriptive coding, Prof?
It is a form of descriptive coding, but it's a little bit more.
I mean, you take the code directly as it is in the text.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Adnan. That's in vivo coding. So you actually use the words of the respondents themselves as your code. Okay. And so why is that a very effective way of coding? Why might that be a very effective way of coding? So you can see in this first code here, close-knit community, they took it exactly from verbatim from the transcript, close-knit community. So let me just read this first one. The respondent says, they ask about strengths of the community, etc., and how it relates to schools. So they say, well, I think Greenfield is a fairly close-knit community. I think people are interested in what goes on, and because of that, they have a sense of ownership in the schools. We like to keep track of what our kids are doing and feel a connection to them because of that. The downside of that, perhaps, is that the kids feel that we are looking too close. But most of the time, that is the nurturing environment that we provide an atmosphere of concern and care. Okay, and so they've coded that whole section as close-knit community. Now, why is that an effective way of coding using in vivo codes?
They are trying to keep the meaning as close as possible to what the participants intended it to be. So they use the participants' own word to label it.
Exactly. Thank you, Chayang. Yeah. So that it ensures that they are coding in a way that's very close to the data. Okay. Very descriptive, right? First level coding is best to be descriptive. Okay, it's best to be descriptive as possible, because as your coding advances to the next level, which would be, well, in grounded theory, axial coding, okay, where you begin to combine codes into larger categories, that is a process of conceptualization. We begin to conceptualize our codes after that, right? We theorize, essentially. Things get more and more conceptual after that. As you go higher up from codes to categories to themes, the idea is that it becomes more and more conceptual. So at the first level of coding, you want to be as descriptive as possible. Okay, so you want to be as close to the data as possible in terms of the words of the respondents themselves. So if you can do that by capturing the words of the participants themselves, of course, it guarantees that you are maintaining that closeness to the data. So you're not running away from from the meaning of the data as expressed by the participants. Okay, and so they use in vivo coding here, right? And the next one here, they say health of the community. Again, health of the community is also here. It's right there. So they use this approach throughout. Community's values, change is threatening. So you can see all the way down, visionary skills. So they clearly had a strategy of using in vivo coding throughout this project. Okay. Now, you don't have to do it that way. You can come up with your own descriptive codes. It's perfectly okay, right? If you're doing an inductive approach, right? So this is data-driven coding, okay? Inductive coding, okay? If this was theory-driven coding or deductive coding, these codes here on the left wouldn't be from the data. They would be from theory. They would be from literature. Okay, so they certainly, or most likely, would not be reflected in the text itself. Okay, they would be more conceptual, okay, because they come from theory, right? But since this is an inductive or data-driven approach, they're using the in vivo coding approach, which is very descriptive. Okay, it comes right from the data. Okay, so this is just one example. Now on the right, and this is important, even though this is not about coding, it is about analysis. Okay, they say themes. I don't know why they use the word themes. This is really memoing. What they're doing here is they're making memos about the data. Okay, so on the left, you have your codes, which is capturing the meaning of the data. On the right, we have the researchers' notes to themselves about the data, which are called memos. So you can do memoing in a big form, right? Big memos where you do an analytical memo where you begin to think about a finding, etc. Or you can do these sort of these mini memos, sort of running memos as you go. And that's what they did here. And so what they do is they basically just make notes to themselves of important aspects of what they find in the data. So here they talk about a potential theme, the community. Okay, so this might be a theme. Okay, so they want to make note of it so that later they might develop that into an actual theme. Okay, here they have just an idea. Okay, getting a good sense here for the community and its values. Again, this is just a note to themselves, really. And this is part of reflexivity. This is part of engaging and interacting with the data. Okay, here they mention a good quote. Whoops, that was not supposed to be a cross out. A good quote. Now, this is really important because why? Why is it good to keep track of good quotes? When you're going through your data and you're coding, you come across a certain quote that really speaks to some particular code or really speaks to some finding. Why is it good to keep track of that?
Because it will be the best to put into the code book as an example quote, and also when we write up a manuscript, that will be the best quote to put into the results table.
Right. Yep, exactly. So when you write up your report, right, whether it's a thesis or an article, whatever the length of the report is, you have to realize that you're going to use a very small percentage of your data in your actual reporting. You're only going to use data quotes from data, whether it's transcripts or field notes or whatever, that really speak to the specific findings that you've come up with. So whatever your themes are, you're going to pick and choose those quotes that best illustrate the finding. And so at the end of the day, that's actually a small percentage of your overall data, right? Because for example, say you've done 10 interviews and each one is 30 pages. Okay, so let's just say you have 300 pages of data. You're certainly not going to present 300 pages of data as part of your chapter 4. Okay, cumulatively, it may only be a few pages really of specific quotes that you're going to use in your chapter 4. So at most, you're going to use maybe 5% of that data to illustrate your findings. So which 5% are you going to use? Well, you have to identify the best quotes that most effectively illustrate those findings. So when you come across one, it's good to make note of it. And that's what they did here, basically, making notes to themselves. And then another potential theme that they see in terms of leadership. And then another idea. Okay, returns to description. Now, in this, when it comes to memoing, you can write anything that's important to you as the researcher. Another good form of memo is questions. So when you're going through the data and the data raises new questions, it's really important to keep track of those questions and then make sure you try to answer those questions. So in your researcher's logbook, if you come across in an interview, they keep saying something or they keep talking about a topic and you're not sure why or you're not sure what it means, write a question to yourself and make sure you get the answer to that question. Whether it means going back and reanalyzing the data, whether it means going back to the respondent to ask them, whether it means asking it in the follow-up interview, whether it means going to the literature, ask the question and make sure you get an answer to the question. Okay, don't leave those questions unanswered if you're going to write questions to yourself. Okay, but those questions are an important part of analysis. They help you to really deepen your analysis as you go along, asking those kind of questions. All right, so this is just one example of a coding approach to coding. Okay, it's data-driven. Again, it's data-driven, it's inductive, and it's using levels of meaning that are quite broad. All right, so let's look at another example that is very different. Okay, so here's another example of coding that's totally different. This is a very short excerpt from a study. And as you can see, this is a manual approach, good old-fashioned handwriting. And this is literally a line-by-line approach of coding to coding. This is most likely a grounded theory study. Grounded theory studies, they typically use a line-by-line coding approach. They literally code every line of text. So you can see it's a very intensive approach to coding. Imagine you have you have to do this for 30 pages or 40 pages or whatever, however long your interview is. Okay, so, and you can see here the way it's coded. Okay, so when you move into your own home, you're alone. This is about a young person, I think, moving out and becoming independent. That's what this study is about. When you move into your own home, you're alone. There's no bustle of people around the house. I miss having someone to chat to when I get home. I put the TV or some music so there's some background noise. The silence makes me feel so alone. Sometimes I will be sat watching trash TV and thinking I should be out doing something rather than watching this rubbish. I read a lot, but sometimes I'm too tired. I just want to veg out. But it's been good to move out of mom and dad's, as it's not healthy to rely on them, as they won't last forever. I become independent and make my own decisions. It's good that they're still there when I need them. It's good to have some distance, as when I was at home, I was arguing a lot with my dad, and that made me decide it was time to go. Okay, so this is definitely a young person. But anyway, as you can see, the coding is very, very specific. And it's not necessarily all using an in vivo coding approach, as you can see. So the first code, when you move into your own home, you're alone. Okay, so he or she codes that as own home, alone / lonely. Okay, there's no bustle of people around. People around. Okay, that's an in vivo code. I miss having someone to chat to when I get home. Miss company. Okay, that's not an in vivo code. That is his or her own code. I put the TV or some music so there's some background noise. Background noise. Okay, in vivo code. The silence makes me feel so alone, lonely, okay? Describing the experience of lonely. Sometimes I will be sat watching trash TV. I think I should be out doing something rather than watching this rubbish. Wasting time, inactive, okay? I read a lot, doing. Sometimes I'm too tired and just want to veg out. Tired, depressed, okay? Et cetera, et cetera. So you can see how specific the coding is here to the text, all right? So again, this is just one paragraph, and he's already got how many codes here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 to 13 codes in just one paragraph. That's a lot of codes. Okay, that's a lot of codes. All right, so why do they code this way? Well, it's clearly influenced by their research design, their study design, which is most likely using grounded theory. Okay. A sort of, most other qualitative approaches don't use this line-by-line approach to coding, okay? This is usually done in grounded theory, all right? But this is definitely influenced by the design of the study, all right? So this is another way of doing first-level, open, inductive coding, all right? Inductive. Again, this is inductive. This is definitely not theory-driven coding. This is data-driven coding. Okay, can everyone see that? Any questions about that? No? Okay, so the next one is actually an example of the same data. The same data, but it's been coded totally differently. Okay, so you can see it's the same data, but this time, whoever coded this data decided to code it differently. Okay, so again, the level of meaning here is much broader. So they're using larger chunks of data to code. It's not line by line, all right? But they do look at certain aspects, specific phrases and words that they code. Okay, so this big whole chunk here, the first half of this is coded as living alone. All right, with some references to feelings also. Okay, feeling alone, missing someone. Okay, so there's element of feelings. Okay. And then the second major code is new relationship with parents, and then independence, and then old relationship with parents. Okay, and then there's some, again, reference to specific phrases. Okay, so there's really just a few codes here, 4 or 5. Same data, but it's coded totally differently. Can they both be right? How is it possible they can both be right? It's just one paragraph of data and the codes are totally different. One has 13 codes, one has 5. And pretty much they're all different. How is that possible? How do we explain that in qualitative research?
Is it flexibility, Prof? Flexible?
Flexible. Well, we have to be flexible to accept both findings. The reader has to be flexible. Yeah, it's not so much flexibility, it's what's driving, it's what's driving the researcher or the analyst to code the way they have. Okay, so in the last example, I mentioned that the coding was done most likely according to a grounded theory approach, right? This one is most likely not grounded theory. It's more of, we don't really know. It looks like it could be just sort of generic qualitative research, thematic analysis, whatnot. It's really hard to say, but it's clearly being influenced by a different set of research questions, okay, a different design, and of course, most likely a different end result or end product. Whereas the previous one, if it's grounded theory, they're trying to develop theory, and that's why they code line by line like that. This one, most likely, they're not trying to develop new theory, they're just trying to do some sort of thematic analysis. Okay, so these design decisions are going to affect how you code your data. All right. Okay, so it's important to realize that there's really no, there's different ways of doing coding. There's no real one right way. It depends, again, on the intention of the researcher, the research questions, the research design, etc. All right. Okay, so are there any other questions about that? So I want to jump now. If not, I want to jump to something else. Let me share. Well, not that one. Okay, can you all see the assignment 2 up on the screen?
Yes.
Okay, so I want to
Yes.
okay, I want to kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone here. I want to talk about your assignment 2 and then also show you an example of a code book.
Yes, Prof.
So tonight we're not going to get into we're not going to work with any, we're not going to do any exercises on developing the code book. We'll start that next week. But it looks like we'll have time to do some initial coding exercises. Okay, but the actual development of the code book, we will start that next week, and we should have 2 or 3 weeks, I think, to work on that. Okay, so even if you're still not clear about it, it's quite okay. Don't worry. It's still early in the process. Okay, so let me just read. Let's go through these structures together, and then I want to show you an example. So on the class blog, sorry, not class blog. I should have changed this. On Putra Blast, I posted 3 full interview transcripts from a study on how female undergraduate students in the United States make decisions about courses and careers in STEM. Okay. So using these transcripts, so this is what the study is about. Okay, it's a study. It's a real study. The transcripts that we're going to use, that you're going to use for your assignment, as well as the ones we're going to use in class, are all from this big study on how female undergraduate students make decisions about courses and careers in STEM. Okay. And so the background of the study was that there was this big camp where all these young women attended on careers in STEM. Okay. And after the camp, they wanted to really understand how the camp sort of influenced their decisions towards pursuing careers in STEM and so forth. So using these transcripts, you're going to produce a code book resulting from your analysis of the transcripts. The analysis should be conducted according to the general interpretive approach laid out in the article titled The Qualitative Data Analysis. Okay, so we didn't use that article in class. Don't worry about that article. What we're doing in the class is really following that approach. I will post this article up on Putra Blast as well, just as an additional resource for you, okay? But we're not going to use that this semester. The study that produced the transcripts had one main research question and 3 sub-questions, okay? So when you conduct your analysis for your assignment 2, you should conduct your analysis using these questions as your guide, okay? So the main question that you're trying to answer is this one, okay? And you're going to find that in qualitative studies, this is often the way that research questions are structured. There's often a main research question with sub-questions, okay? So the main research question is, what are the influences on the young women's decision-making to pursue STEM courses and careers? Okay, and these are the sub-questions, these 3. So these are the 3 questions that you're really going to focus on for your analysis. Okay, so when you go through and analyze the data in the transcripts, you're going to focus on these 3 questions. What influenced their choice of college to attend? Okay, so college in US parlance or language, college and university are the same thing. Okay, so what influenced their choice of college or university to attend? What influenced their choice of courses or classes to take? And what influenced their choice of future career? Okay, so their future career in terms of what they want to, they talk about their career and what they want to do in their future career. And so your job is to analyze to find out what influences their choice of career. Okay, so in line with the article that we just talked about in class today, your code book should contain category names, definitions, codes, and then quotes, okay? So now this is where it sometimes gets, so I have mentioned here categories and then codes. Just now in the class, we talked about the code book being codes and then code definition and then data, okay? There is some disagreement as to whether these are categories or codes. So let me just show you the example first, and I think it'll be clear to you. Okay, so I've also included an example of what the code book should look like. Okay, so here is a very short example. It looks similar to the one that was done in the article. All right, but essentially your code book is going to look something like this, where you have in yellow, you can see the yellow here is the name of the code. Okay, in fact, I should change.
Sorry, Prof, you're still seeing the transcript only on the screen.
Sorry?
We're only seeing the transcript on the screen. We can't see the.
Yeah, Prof.
Yes.
On the screen.
Transcript.
Yes, on the screen is about pin relief.
Oh, really? Sorry.
Yeah, we're just staring at pain relief transcript.
Only 4 lines. Yes.
All right, let me try that again. Why do you guys wait so long to tell me? I've been talking for like 10 minutes.
I'm lost. Like, am I the one who wrongly see things?
Ayo. Okay.
Trying to figure out what happened.
No, when I go to my share screen, it doesn't show which it just says Microsoft Word. It doesn't show the documents. So I don't know which document it's showing. Okay. Do you see now assignment 2 data analysis code book?
Yes.
Yes, Prof.
Yes.
Okay. Apologies. My bad. Okay. I'm not gonna repeat everything I just said, but I'll just repeat the important parts. You can read this again. It's up on the Putra Blast under the assignment 2. All right. Anyway, each code book should contain. Okay. I showed that. Okay, this one. So your code book will look something like this. All right. You're gonna have the name of the code in yellow. Do you see that? The yellow learning preferences. You see that? Yes. Are you guys seeing?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, Prof.
Just want to confirm. Just want to confirm. Okay. So the code name is learning preferences. The name of the code. The definition of the code is what's in green, okay? So for example, learning preferences, preferred learning formats, approaches and modes of knowledge information transmission, either in class or non-classroom learning experiences. Now, where does the definition come from? So the definition of your code it comes from the data. All right. So for example, if you look at number 2 here, all right, support. Now this is actually from the study that you're going to be analyzing. Okay, from the Girls on Track. It's called Girls on Track study. Okay, and so one of the codes, you'll probably come up with this code also when you go to the data, is support. The girls get a lot of support for their decision making. Okay, whether it's about decision making about school, whether it's a decision about career, they get a lot of support. So one of the codes is support. Okay, and so in the data we have support of different types. Okay, so we've coded data about parents, specifically mothers, peers and other students, people from the school like admin staff, teachers, professors, etc. Okay, actually this should not be here. And then there's implicit and explicit forms of support and freedom and flexibility as form of support. Okay, so in terms of support, there's different types of support, and so all of those are included here as subcodes. Now it's from this really that your definitions are going to come, or where you're going to get your definition from. So this definition is really defined by the subcodes, okay, that you're going to come across as you're coding your data. All right, and so you're going to present it like this. Okay, so here's a more fleshed out example. All right, and so this is from an actual. I took this actually from one of the past assignment 2s from previous semesters from one of the other students. Okay, so the student came up with the code support system. Okay, this is the code. Now, she defines the code as individuals or a group of people who provide emotional, psychological, financial, or any type of assistance in order to help or encourage someone in certain circumstances. Okay, and in the study itself, she identifies 3 types of, or 3 sources of support. Support from parents, okay? So these would be the subcodes, right? And then the data, okay? And you can see here, this is the actual quote from the transcript, the name of the respondent, and then where the line numbers where they took the data from, okay? So she says here, and my parents, my dad had gone to grad school at MIT, and they had led a church group, a small church group in Boston area. And they would also tell me, oh, the Wellesley girls were the smartest grades. We want you to be a Wellesley girl. Okay, so support from parents. Okay, and then she says, and then it just turned out like they giving me the most financial support. Okay, so parents were giving the most financial support, were giving her financial support. All right, so both of these quotes refer to support from parents. Okay, so it's coded as under the code of support system and the subcode of parents. Okay, but there's another type of support, support from administration or staff. Okay, and so the data, the quote she uses here to support that finding is, I felt really pampered as a first year because they really make sure they take care of you. The administration, everybody really pours into you, and then you just feel like there's no end to the support system. And not only the administration and the Wellesley, and not only the administration and the staff at Wellesley, I mean. Okay, so administration and staff. All right, so support from administration and staff. All right, and then the third one is the dean or professors. Okay, so here she uses two quotes or chunks of data to support this finding of support from deans or professors. I just really love the school, the way the professors really cater to you, etc. Okay, so professors, and then everybody really pours into you, and then you just feel like there's no end to the support system. Not only the dean and the professors. So she uses the same quote here under 2 different codes. Now, in the beginning, that's okay. Especially if it's the same code, and it is the same code. The code is support system, right? These are subcodes, so it's just a way of breaking down the codes further. But the main code here is support system, so she uses the same quote under 2 different subcodes. Okay, so you're going to go through and do the same thing for yours. So you're going to have a successive presentation of these codes, definitions, and then, supporting data. All right. So it'll look like this. So 1, 2, and that, 3, 4, 5, depending on how many codes you end up with. You may end up with, for each research question, you may end up with 8 or 10 of these codes. Okay. And that's going to be what your code book is going to look like at the end. All right. So it's going to look something like this. Okay, now this is the example. Now, of course, I haven't shown you how we get this, right? So it's still probably quite confusing. So starting next week, when we go through the transcripts together, those practice transcripts, we're going to begin to develop this codebook. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to build up the codebook and how to get to this. Okay, but I just wanted to show you first, this is what it's going to look like. Okay, this is going to be your end product for your codebook, right? At least for the class. Your thesis codebook will be much more developed. All right. If you just bear with me for a second, I just want to pull up to show you what a more developed codebook looks like. Let's see. Okay, so let me share this one. Oh, darn. That's not it. Okay, can you guys see what do you see on your screen right now?
Pain relief.
Pain relief.
That's not it. Let me try that again. Sorry. God, where is that? That's not it. That's not it. Okay, what do you see now?
Codebook, I guess.
What does it actually say?
Revised preliminary
Revised
category list.
category list.
Revised category list.
This is what, but this one, okay, sorry, this is not good. This doesn't have the quotes, but this is a full code book from that study, the Girls on Track study. Okay, so I won't share this with you because I don't want you to use this as an example. I want you to come up with your own, but this is what, this is the code book I came up with when I did this, exercise. Okay, for us, we didn't have to include the quotes underneath. Okay, so you can see it's going to be a list like this. Okay, so it's going to have the code, definition, and then the subcodes, but you're going to also have, like here, you're going to also have the quotes underneath. All right, I just don't have those in mind. All right, but it's going to look like this. Now, if you have a code book like this and you go back and try to analyze another transcript of data, it's going to make your analysis so easy. So easy. Why? Because much of the data that's going to be in that transcript is going to be captured by these codes already. Okay, and that's the advantage of the code book. As your code book develops, as you go through the study, as you collect more and more data, you analyze more and more data, and the code book develops. As you go along, you're going to find that most of the data that you're coming across from each new interview that you do, each new transcript, it's going to be captured here in these existing codes, right? And so once you get to a point where you see there's really no new codes to develop because everything's captured here in the code book, then you know you've reached saturation, okay? And you have a very strong argument to make for reaching saturation. If you don't have a code book like this, if you don't have a systematic way of identifying, your codes with definitions, with the not matching, what's the word? With the data, the quotes, whatever. If you don't have that, it's really hard to know and to justify saturation. Okay, you have no real systematic way of determining saturation. You just say, oh, well, there's nothing new coming into the there's no new, findings coming out of the data. Well, how do you really know that? How can you really show that systematically? But if you have a code book like this, you can make that decision much easier, right? And it's a much more structured way of doing it. So after your analysis, after 8 or 9, this is after 8 or 9 transcripts, 8 or 9 interviews, okay, this code book was developed. Okay, and so you can see it's very structured, and it will from here, and then you can begin to look at how these different codes here sort of come together or integrate into categories, larger categories. Okay, so you look at you do sort of pattern analysis and stuff like that, and that's how you develop your themes, your larger findings. Okay, but it all starts here with the codebook. So once you've got this codebook, it makes that second level analysis much easier. Okay, so I'm not gonna share this with you just because I don't want to pollute your own analysis. You should do your analysis on your own and come up with your own codebook. All right, but I just wanted to show that. Okay, so don't worry if you're confused about how we get the codebook, how it sort of comes into being and how we develop it. We're gonna really focus on that in the next few classes. But I just want us to have a clear idea of what it is, what it looks like. Okay, let me now let's do some coding. But we're not going to code a transcript. We're going to start with something a little bit more. What's the word? It's sort of just a sort of a test or assessment to see your what is called theoretical sensitivity. Theoretical sensitivity. Okay, I'm going to show you this data if I can pull it up. I don't know if I can pull it up. I need to show you the pain relief thing that you guys were looking at before. Let me try and get it up again. Okay, can you see the pain relief is a major problem on the screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, yes.
Now, what I want you to do is the exercise or the activity is I want you to look at this text, read it, and come up with as many codes as you can. How you do it, what you define as a code is totally up to you. This is real open coding. I just want you to code this text and see how many codes you can come up with. So you may want to make notes, like, jot down on your own, like what the codes are. Okay. So go ahead, take a few minutes to do it. Okay, done? Finished?
Yes, bro.
Okay, so those who have finished. So how many, who would like to share? How many did you come up with?
I have 3.
Okay. Would you like to share them, Augustine?
Okay. Pain relief is a nightmare when you have arthritis. 1, the pain you get from arthritis is crippling.
Is what? Sorry?
Crippling.
Crippling.
Yeah, it can incapacitate you. No, you'll be unable to do anything.
Okay.
Yeah, and the 3rd one is the relief you get from the pain relief medicine is not permanent. Relief is not permanent.
Okay. So you used more of an in vivo coding approach. Is that right?
No, manual. I just
manual. No, I know it's manual. I know you're not using software, but it sounds like you are essentially using the same text that's in the code. That's in the data. The same text of the data for your coding. Is that right?
Yeah. I need to use.
So if you're using the actual text,
different text, right?
No, I didn't say that. I just said code the data. I didn't say how you had to code it. It's up to you how you code the data. I said you could code it any way you wanted. I'm just observing. It sounds like you did more of an in vivo coding, used an in vivo coding approach because your codes sounded very similar to the actual text.
Yes, but yes.
Okay, your second code is you said that the pain is crippling.
Yes.
Okay, but can you?
Cannot do anything.
Yeah, but can you read that very carefully? Read it again.
You feel so bad, you don't want to get out of bed.
No.
You don't feel it.
The previous sentence.
Okay. You mean the one I coded the way I did?
No, read the sentence before that. Just read the sentence before that.
Okay, but okay. Sometimes the pain is worse than the other times. But when it gets really bad, it's also bad. Yeah, true. It's also bad. You don't want to get out of bed.
Okay, so it says sometimes the pain is worse than other times.
Other times.
But when it gets really bad, whoa, it hurts so bad you don't want to get out of bed. So it's not the pain is crippling, because it doesn't say the pain is always crippling. It says sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes.
Okay, so that's where you need to be careful.
Yes.
So you need to be careful. Again, coding is meaning. You're trying to capture meaning. So if you coded that as pain is crippling, it's not necessarily accurate to the text. It's not capturing what it's actually saying. Sometimes it's crippling, yes, but the point there is that the pain fluctuates.
Yes.
And it can get very bad, but it fluctuates.
Yes.
Okay, so that's why you need to be very sensitive. When you do your coding, you need to be very sensitive to the text. You need to be very clear what the text and what the data is saying. A lot of times we do interviews and we ask questions and we don't get very clear answers, yet we don't follow up and ask our participants for clarification. So then when we go and we code the text, we're not even really sure what the text is saying, and we try and code it. And that causes big problems. Okay, so we have to make sure that we are really clear about what that text is saying. Okay, so otherwise, yeah, your other codes are fine. Okay, so you had 3 codes. Anybody else? Did anybody else code the text differently? Would like to share?
Yes, Prof. I want to share.
Okay.
The first one is how the pain affects us, and the second is how do we manage the pain. The first one would be like
me and you.
And the second one is how do we manage the pain.
Okay.
So how do we manage the pain is using the drugs. But he acknowledged that it's only a temporary solution. to manage the pain. For how it affects the person, he acknowledged that it demotivates him even to get out of the bed. He doesn't feel like doing anything, and he knows that it's not consistent. Sometimes it's really bad, sometimes it's just bad.
Okay. All right. So you had just two codes.
Yeah.
Okay. This is what I was referring to before about when you do your first level coding, it's important to code close to the data. In other words, yes, drugs is a form of management, but it's the only thing that they talk about in this small chunk of text that relates to management. So actually, management is more of a concept. So it's not to say that you are wrong in how you code it. There really is, I mean, there are actually, yes, you can be wrong in how you code. So don't think that any way you code is right. No. Subjective does not mean that, anything you say and I'm coding this as, rainbows and lollipops. That's not accurate. There's nothing in this text or in this data that has any reference to rainbows and lollipops. So that way of coding would be completely wrong. Okay. So you can code wrong. It's not to say that just because it's a subjective process, there's no wrong way of coding. And so management is not wrong. The only thing is that management is more of a concept. And so you're sort of conceptualizing the data before you're describing the data. Okay. And so I would just recommend or suggest try to code more closely to the specific meaning of the data first. Okay. Drugs, there may be, if you read on and you read more of the transcript, they may talk about other ways of managing pain, then definitely management will come in. Definitely you can use management. Again, it's not to say it's wrong. It's more of a concept. It's more of something that would come across as a category rather than a code. Okay, at this level. All right. So that's the only thing that I would say to that. Okay, so thank you though. Good sharing. Good attempt. Okay, who would like to go next?
Yes, Professor.
Yes, Junji, go ahead.
Okay. Actually, I have 3 codes consist of 5 aspects, and the first one is syndrome. And from the first sentence, it is I find out it is I name it as syndrome, and then the
symptom or syndrome.
Syndrome.
Syndrome. Okay, syndrome.
And then when we come to the sub-sentence, when you have arthritis, I name it as Unix, and that's the second code. And then when we move on, we can find that there is a description of the feeling of the patient. So I name it as feeling. That's the second code, in my opinion.
Okay.
And then it said that it hurts so bad, blah blah, and don't feel like doing anything, and that's another syndrome. Specifically, I called it is lazy, and it is the sub aspect. It is one of the aspects of the code-named syndrome. And then when we move on to the last sentence, any relief you get from blah blah, and it is the wrong solution to this kind of illness, and so I name it as the third code as wrong solution, and that's my opinion.
Okay, that's an interesting way of coding. So the use of syndrome is sort of like the overarching category that you've come up with, and then you have all those are subcodes underneath syndrome. Is that what you did?
Yes.
Describing the syndrome. Okay. All right. Yeah. The only thing I would say there is, so you have feelings. What was the first one? I forgot. Feelings. Before feelings was what?
Let me see. Illness.
Illness.
Illness is the second aspect of syndrome.
Okay, and what aspect is illness? You mean the arthritis is the illness?
Let me have a
Which
check.
text? Which text in there is?
Sorry. Illness is the second code. Second is the second.
Yeah, but
code.
illness refers to which text specifically?
It can find it from the first line. That is when you have arthritis.
You have what? Arthritis. The first sentence.
Yes, the sub sentence in the first line.
Okay, so pain relief is a major problem when you have arthritis. You coded that as illness.
Yeah.
Okay.
The main sentence of it, it is the syndrome, and the close sentence, it is about illness. And so in this whole sentence, it consists. I include from inductive two codes.
Okay. Yeah, I guess it's kind of hard because you can't actually show. It's really important that you code, when you do your coding, you're coding specific text with a specific code. In other words, I coded the first sentence as such, and then I coded the second sentence as such, or I coded the first 3 lines as such. Okay, so you need to, again, the purpose of the code is to really summarize the meaning of a specific set of text. Okay, so it's really important that you can identify which lines or which sentences or which text specifically you are applying a code to. Right, that's why I was asking. It's hard that you can't really say, well, this first part I'm coding like this and the second part like that. No, you need to be more specific. Okay, so so for example, like feelings, yeah, like it hurts so bad you don't want to get out of bed. You don't feel like doing anything. Okay, so that one I can definitely see being coded as feelings. Any relief you get from drugs you take is only temporary or partial. Now, you coded it as wrong solution. I'm not sure how you can get from that wrong solution, because the text does say that there is partial relief from the drugs. So to code it as wrong solution, I don't really see the connection there. That could definitely be questioned. But yeah, it's a good attempt. I would just make sure. Again, the first level of coding, you want to be as descriptive as possible and be as close to the data as possible. Okay, so let me just show you an example of the possibilities that you can. So this is another way of coding the data. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, 10 possible codes here. All right. Now, when you do initial or open level, open coding or first level coding, you can code text more than once. Like, certain text there may be overlap, so you can code certain text more than once. But this is similar to the line by line coding that I showed the example of before, right? So some possible codes here. Again, this is just my way of looking at the data, but pain relief as a problem with arthritis. Okay, clearly it's a problem. It's mentioned in the first sentence. Severity of the problem. Okay, so sometimes the pain is worse than at other times. Okay, so that implies that that the problem itself of pain relief can be quite severe. Pain fluctuation. Sometimes it's worse than other times. Okay, but when it gets really bad, whoa, it hurts so bad, etc. So sometimes the pain is worse than at other times. Okay, that definitely speaks to the fluctuation of the pain. Sometimes it's bad, sometimes it's not so bad. Okay, severity of the pain. When it gets really bad, whoo, they're talking clearly about the severity of the pain. It hurts so bad you don't want to get out of bed. That's speaking to the effects of the pain. Because the pain is so bad, you don't want to even move. You don't want to get out of bed. That's the effect of the pain. You don't feel like doing anything. Okay, pain can immobilize, right? It immobilizes you. You can't do anything. You just want to sit there and lie in bed. And bedridden from the pain. Okay, another way of coding that one about the bed. Okay, bedridden. Literally, you're bedridden. Not only are you immobilized, but you're also bedridden. Any relief you get from drugs. Okay, so drugs as treatment. Okay, so drugs are a treatment. Okay, any relief you get from drugs. The relief from the drugs is only temporary. Okay, so that's basically an in vivo code that captures what's said there. Okay, so this is another way of coding it, all right? More of a line-by-line approach. It's actually sentence by sentence. And even within the sentences, there's multiple codes within those sentences, okay? So that's why I was just, the idea of when I first gave you this activity, I said, try to come up with as many codes as you can, okay? So you can actually code a lot if you really want to. But again, it's not to say that how you guys coded is wrong, and this is right. Again, there's no absolute right or wrong, but this is just to show that first level coding, you really want to stay as close to the data as possible. But it does not necessarily mean you have to code to this detail, to this level of detail. Okay, 2 or 3 codes for this could have been fine. Even 1 code for this whole passage could have been fine. You know, it would have been fine. Okay, but it's just an exercise that I was just giving, just to see how, you know, how sensitive we could be to the data. Okay, so and look at that, it's 9 o'clock. All right, so I see there's a lot of activity in the chat box going on. I just want to see what people are talking about here. Okay, let's see. Oh, you guys are sharing your findings. That's good. All right, so yeah, I see some, yeah, most of you had 3 codes: emotion, health, situation, motivation, feelings, effects of pain. Yeah, that's good. All right, relief, drugs, and sense of pain. Good. You have, well, 2nd level coding. Wow. For such a small bit of text, that's good. Okay. Yeah, the more you see in the data, the better. All right. Problem, arthritis, consequence of pain, solution to the pain. Yeah, good. All right. Arthritis problem, how does it feel physically? How does it feel mentally? Effectiveness of drugs. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, so that looks good. Yeah, those are all good. I mean, there's nothing, I think you guys got the idea. All right. So this is just an example. So next week, we'll actually be doing this, more exercises with the actual transcripts. Okay, so we'll begin to build our code books. And so we can all put it all together, and you can see how a code book actually develops from this first level of coding. Okay, any final questions or comments? So just a note for the rest of the semester, the presenters, yeah, just a reminder, when you present your articles, please just stick to the article that's being, that I'm asking for presentation in the class. Don't do a literature review on the topic and bring in all these other sources. Okay, just stick to the article and try to describe and summarize the article as best you can. I know time is short. I know it's difficult because some of those articles are quite content rich. So to get everything in there in a short period of time is hard. Try to emphasize the main points, give examples if you can from the article, all right? But yeah, just do your best to really explain what's in the article, and no need to go beyond the article and bring in any other outside references, okay? Just focus on the article. Okay?
Okay, Prof. Okay, Prof. Thank you.
All right. Okay, everyone, thanks. And I guess, inshallah, we'll see you next week. Yeah, go ahead, Tang.
With regards to the files in the Putra Blast, the assignment folder that we can access, we only have got 3 files for transcripts, but the instruction on the what do you call that? The instruction on the structure of the code book and all that thing, that document is not there. So I'm just wondering whether the file is missing.
Yeah, I'll add that. I thought it was there. Oh, I think because I actually included the text. Yeah. So what I did was I included the text. I don't have that what I showed you just now. I actually put it in the Putra Blast, the text itself. It's the same text.
Okay. Okay.
Right?
Because it didn't have the color coding thing that you showed just now. So
no, that one I'll add. I'll add that one, and I'll add the Baptiste article as well.
All right. Thank you, Prof.
Thanks for pointing that out, Chang. Yeah, thank you. Okay, everyone. Inshallah, see you next week. Have a good week. Stay safe.
Thank you. Good night.
Okay, good night.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof.
Okay.
You too, Prof.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you, Prof.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you, Prof.
Bye, good night.